Alrighty, welcome back guys to the Blue Room, where we break down two opponents, analyzing their strengths and their weaknesses to reach a conclusion on which fighter comes out victorious. And this really is no ordinary fight. There is no unnecessary hype train behind it. We have two widely regarded pound for pound fighters, both of them in their prime, both of them undefeated, but most importantly, both men truly believing in themselves. Now this will be an objective, unbiased breakdown, which is why within the Blue Room I like to put my cards on the table and tell you who I am subjectively rooting for, and that fighter is Errol Spence. However, that doesn't mean that Errol Spence will be my final pick. So with that being said, let's move on to the tail of the tape. On the left, we have Terence Crawford, who has held multiple world championships in 3 weight classes, including the WBO welterweight title since 2018. On the right, we have Errol Spence, who is currently a unified welterweight world champion, having held the IBF title since 2017 and the WBC title since 2019 and the WBA title since 2022. Crawford will be stepping in the ring with 39 wins, 0 losses and 0 draws. Spence has 28 wins with 0 losses. Crawford is 5'8", whilst Errol Spence is 5'9", which is a surprise to me. I thought Spence was taller. Crawford has a 74-inch reach, whilst Spence's reach is 72 inches. Both men are of a similar age, Crawford being 35, Spence being 33, and both fighters stand out of the southpaw stance. We know that Crawford is comfortable switch hitting from orthodox to southpaw, and I think this ability of Crawford's is worth noting, since I will be elaborating on it once we explore the keys to victory. Now, outside of the stance switching, just based on the tail of the tape alone, I don't believe there's anything else that stands out, giving one or the other an edge in the fight. They're both of a similar age, they're in their prime. The height and reach difference, when you have so much experience fighting at a professional level, I don't believe will play a huge role. So with that, let's break down the technicalities, the pros and cons of both fighters, beginning with Terence Crawford. Now, often what you'll find with Crawford is he starts slow, but he's mainly doing so just to set traps. So he's very defensive minded and he's making reads, learning his opponent's patterns. I mean, if you look at the first round of Crawford versus Porter, for example, Crawford spends the first minute staying just on the outside of Porter's lunging right hooks, but it doesn't take long at all for Crawford to learn his patterns, and then Crawford starts leading with the left jab. A lot of what Crawford does so well fundamentally stems from his footwork, and although he's not really a smack talker, you'll often see in Crawford's fights that he likes to smile at his opponents if he's controlling the fight. Not necessarily if it's a war, but just to show, hey, I've got full control of this. When Crawford slips hooks, his feet are very rarely stationary. He puts his whole body in motion to avoid strikes, but at the same time maintain his balance. Again, with Crawford being more the counter puncher, he likes to set up traps which enable him to throw heavy strikes to, for example, the body, landing with precision as his opponent rushes in for, say, the 3rd or 4th time. So with that, he has a very high IQ, throwing his jab out there not necessarily with the intention to hit, but to get his opponent to bite and throw the combinations that Crawford wants them to throw. His ability to keep range, not just to avoid strikes, but to initiate strikes attempted by his opponents. So for example, you'll often see Crawford's head just in striking range, prompting his opponent to strike. Crawford will pull back, countering with a heavy strike. I noticed in the Porter fight, for example, how frustrated Porter was because he knew he was walking into it. And you see in the later rounds, Porter attempt to strafe and shuffle cut, yet Crawford had that ability to counter with the same movement. Again, very much focused on footwork and distance keeping. So I mentioned earlier Crawford's ability to switch stance, and he will usually switch stance from orthodox to southpaw if his opponent is finding success with the jab or feinting the jab to land a follow-up strike. The minute he switches to southpaw, he's completely dialed in. But from here, of course, his opponent has to adapt to a style which is not natural to them. We saw this somewhat when Crawford fought Kell Brook. Kell was having success with the jab and it seemed like an even chess match until Crawford switched stances and Brook appeared to be out of his comfort zone. Now, in terms of Crawford's weaknesses, this is always tough to call when a fighter is undefeated. Some say that he's susceptible to the right hook because he got knocked down by Kavalauskas, and some say he's susceptible to the jab because Amir Khan had success in the early rounds. And look, even if it was a knockdown from Kavalauskas, Crawford ended up knocking him out. So with that being said, I don't think this fight will be focused so much on finding weaknesses. It will be more focused on who can implement what they do best. And that brings me on to Errol Spence. Now, I have no qualms informing you that I prefer Errol Spence's style. He's a pressure fighter. You'll often see him take the center of the ring where he will establish his jab and then look to fight inside. You'll rarely see Spence on the outside focused on counters. Instead, he likes to push the action, punching in volume. But what really makes Spence so special, in my eyes at least, is his pinpoint accuracy. It is a sight to behold. Now, Spence also stands in southpaw. He'll lead with the jab and follow up with thudding straights to the body hooks, body uppercuts, whilst mixing up top. But how he typically finds success with this style, where he's on the inside throwing multiple combinations, isn't just with his precision, it's because he throws his shots offbeat. Whenever you watch a Spence fight, pay attention to the sounds of the punches landed. They're thudding shots, and if you watch the reaction of his opponents, they freeze up and they're overthinking the next shot that Spence is going to throw because these shots clearly hurt. Now, whilst on the inside, he also keeps his body long, often dipping his head low and throwing multiple body uppercuts, almost like someone sprinting in a race. When you consider the onslaught he puts on his opponents, he's still able to maintain that pace up to the 12th round, where in most cases, if his opponents reach the later rounds, by that time Spence is in his zone, as we saw against the likes of Sean Porter, who Errol Spence out-pressured and dropped in round 11. Now, in terms of weaknesses, Spence's style leaves him open to counters, and you can find compilations out there of Spence getting hit flush on the chin and just eating it, smiling at his opponent and moving on. So it's clear he has a great chin. However, with Crawford's knockout ability, specifically up top, Spence really doesn't want to test his chin in this one. And that leads me to keys to victory. And I'm going to bring up some comparisons which I think will be highly debatable in the comment section. So let me know in the comment section if you agree or disagree with these points. Both Spence and Crawford fought Sean Porter and Kell Brook, both high-level professional boxers who many thought in all cases were pick and fights. Now, the narrative that I've seen going into this fight is that Terence Crawford had a better performance against Sean Porter and Kell Brook, and I disagree with this perspective. When Errol Spence fought Sean Porter, he stood with him toe to toe. If you know Sean Porter, he's a pit bull who moves forward and stalks his prey, and Spence beat him at his own style. Sure, it was a close fight, but if you pay attention to the later rounds, Spence does to Porter what he does to everyone else, landing thudding punches, freezing them up, and just teeing off on them. Now, Terence Crawford on the flip side, I had Crawford winning. However, it was clear Porter was frustrated, rushing forward, and feel free to watch it again, but the shots that dropped Porter didn't seem to have that much of an effect on him, and his dad, out of frustration for his son's performance, threw the towel in. It was one of the most ridiculous corner stoppages I've seen in boxing history, and I think many would agree. When Spence fought Kell Brook, it was fairly even until Errol Spence took over and did again what he does to every single fighter, landing thudding shots to where Kell Brook had no choice other than to defend, and due to what I believe was Kell Brook's eye injury, the fight was stopped. Crawford, on the other hand, arguably fought a Brook who was past his prime, had just gone through a dreadful weight cut. Their fight was fairly even until Crawford landed a glancing jab, and listen, I could be wrong, but it just felt something wasn't right with Kell Brook in that fight, and I completely understand if you guys disagree with me. I guess the point I'm making is that Errol Spence, I believe, meticulously broke down those fighters, really imposing his will on them, and with that I felt he had the more impressive victories over those same opponents. So let's look at the keys to victory. We know that Errol Spence is the pressure fighter, and in order for him to find success, he will look to find his rhythm on the inside, looking to stifle Crawford, make him overthink each time he gets hit to the body, to the chest, to the arm. He wants to make Crawford overthink and remain stationary. On the flip side, Crawford will stay on the outside, and I believe he will look to bait Spence into the pocket, but rely on slips in order to counter Spence's jab with a straight of his own. Where I believe Crawford can stifle Spence will be his ability to switch stance and maintain his rhythm off the jump, whereas for Spence it will take him a while to adapt. This is an extremely tough fight to call, and I really believe it's down to who can impose their will. Again, opponents which they both faced in the past, it's been questionable if they were in their prime or if they were shot fighters. In this case, both Spence and Crawford are in their prime. I'm fully aware of Spence's past accidents, but if you look at his more recent performances, I would argue that he's the same fighter. I guess the point I'm trying to say here is that I don't expect to see any flukes, any questionable wins, unless of course it goes to the judges, but that will be for a whole other video. So who do I think wins this fight? I am edging it to Spence. To be clear, edging it to Spence. Fully aware that with Crawford's boxing IQ and Spence's tendency to get hit clean on the jaw, Crawford gets the victory. However, If we're talking skill for skill and Spence's consistent success as a pressure fighter, it's really hard for me to pick against Spence. We don't do 50-50s here. My heart was originally pulling for Spence, and so is my head, based on a fairly objective analysis. If you guys enjoy technical breakdowns, in fact, if you disagree with what I've had to say, let me know down in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe, since I will be offering more coverage for Spence and Crawford as we draw nearer to the fight. Have a great week, guys. Take care of yourselves. Peace.